Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those dialing in. Excited to be part of this panel, and thanks to the team for bringing me on board to help moderate. Got an exciting group of folks today to help us dive into the details here, merging our passion for digital and our passion for enabling people. So I'm really excited for today's topics. Joining me today, first off, is Padiyar. He's the head of data strategy and performance for PETRONAS. He's based out of Kuala Lumpur, and he's got a long-standing passion for design thinking. He's been a business coach throughout various parts of his career, and he previously was with IBM before joining PETRONAS. Second, I've got Mario Antonio Del Pino. He's a digital lead for Repsol based out of the Lima office, and he's led multiple MVP programs focused on the digital twin space. Third, I've got Ben Hewitt. He is the head of Lifecycle Information Management with Wood, based out of Aberdeen, and he's had a career fully with Wood, actually, with a background in IT and information management, shifting over to operations support, and now on as part of the digital asset management and digital twin teams. So really excited to have a diverse group of people from all around the globe to join us today. So to kick us off, we're gonna start with organic data, and we're gonna talk about building the foundation, because without that foundation, you can't even think about collaboration. You can't think of moving up that pyramid, getting towards AI or machine learning. So Patty, kick us off with your thoughts around how do you maintain that data foundation from making sure the data is clean to then how that data moves between teams and any sort of governance strategy that you've got within PETRONAS.
Thanks, Curt, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening to whichever part of the world that you're in, right? So I think broadly, when we go ahead and look at the getting the foundations right? I think it's not really a single siloed approach that we can actually go ahead and say that we're going to look at foundations, getting it right in this area of governance, but then we need to go ahead and look at it, getting the foundations right in different aspects, right? So it could be governance, that could be capabilities, skill sets, knowledge areas. We look at getting the foundations right in, let's say, master data management, metadata management, etc. And then there's also getting the foundations right at the primary source where the data is actually being created, right? And that's mainly in terms of right now the data producers as such, right? It could be applications, it could be systems, it could be people, and all of that. So data hygiene is one of those things that really pops up, right? When we really look at it from the point of view of the getting the foundations right, and data hygiene, it can be construed in different ways. In the archaic definition, you go out and look at it, it's basically what we refer to as data cleansing, making sure that we have clean data. But then in the last few years, as that particular definition has really evolved, right? So the definition of data hygiene, it really means more than just cleaning up the data, right? It's also about making sure, while we're talking about cleaning up data as incorrect, duplicate, unused data, etc., these are being classified and migrated. We're also really looking at in terms of, okay, do we have the adequate guardrails for determining how this particular data is going to be stored or archived or destructed on an ongoing basis using things like an automated policy enforcement, right? So these are things that we actually go and look at. From a best practice as such, right? So generally what we look at is, do you really have a good idea and understanding in terms of, okay, where exactly all of your data is located, right? So I think we start with that. Because as you try to uncover this, you'd find data sitting in somebody's laptop, somewhere sitting on a server or a cloud storage, removable media, etc. So that's one, in terms of really knowing where exactly that data is. And then once you have that good understanding of that, it's really about, are you really classifying this particular data? Because you want to go ahead and really eliminate all of the noise and really look at it from what's going to drive value. So you start looking at, okay, do we have business critical data, or is there any particular data which is essential for meeting compliance or regulatory needs? Is there anything which is trivial or obsolete that I can actually make redundant, right? So the unnecessary ones. So you start thinking about all of those particular aspects and really start thinking about classifying your data. And then you move on to really start thinking about, okay, do we have a kind of a program in place within the organization to help and classify the data across its life cycle, primarily for the ones which are business critical, right? So right from creation to storage, sharing, archiving, destructions, etc. And then not only about that, but also in terms of, okay, when you really decide that, okay, data is no longer needed, uh, how do you go ahead and securely erase that, right, when it's not needed anymore as part of its life cycle. And it's not just only about, at the time when those particular data assets are being retired, right? So I think that's how I would really look at it. Foundations right, and then scaling it up from improving the data hygiene. From the governance point of view, I think the main thing that I look at, specifically at least within Petronas as well as the other organizations that I've been a part of, it's mainly to go out and look at, do we have the right sponsorship or an executive sponsorship, right? And that's really key. You could probably go out and look at saying we want to go out and do everything else, but then the first step there is really to make sure that you have the right level of executive sponsorship, right? I've seen numerous organizations fail in their data transformation journeys, uh, just simply because the executive sponsorship was not that really strong, right? So I think that's one of the key things. The second is really to go ahead and make sure that you have a good assessment of your current state, right? And this you can use any maturity assessment. You can use Dama or any one of those Gartner or any other maturity assessments, right? But you need to go out and look at it holistically, not just by individual dimensions, but also look at it from, let's say, the literacy and culture within the organization. You go out and look at it from the quality and governance. You look at it from the architecture point of view, etc. And then be able to go out and really make sure that you have adequate measurements for these particular data maturity, and then continue to track those particular actions or improvement areas through a roadmap, and make sure that you have adequate KPIs to measure the impact, right? I think that's something which is really essential to help in terms of getting the foundations right, as well as putting in the kind of plans to go ahead and scale up your the data maturity in the areas of governance or the other areas that like data hygiene, etc., that we're talking about. So that's my thinking.
No, it's fantastic. Appreciate that. So in summary, when you talk about data health, it's about at the get-go identifying those easy wins, and that might be redundant data, identifying redundant data or noisy or bad quality data, and really sweeping that under the rug, followed by identifying next your business critical results. Because with our sponsorships and our minimum value pilots and products, we can't just waste time working a governance structure without producing results. So it's focusing on what's going to really impact the business right up front. And then when it came to governance, you talked about having the right sponsorship. It's having the right people who understand the value of these programs, understand the value of a data foundation, and sticking to our roadmaps. I mean, I think everybody sets out a roadmap with best intentions, but making sure you revisit and hold yourself accountable is the even more difficult part of that story. I want to invite Ben to provide some of your thoughts from an EPC perspective, how you see data and data scrubbing and data hygiene.
Yeah, thanks, Curt. I think that the first question for me when it comes to data hygiene is understanding what does good data mean, because that is the ultimate question that we all need to ask ourselves. And good may mean different things to different people. So, for example, good may mean that the data is all present and correct based on the requirements we set out. It may mean that the values are correct, so there isn't a dash where a dot should be. It may mean that the engineering information behind it is correct, that it's in the correct units of measure. So before we even start talking about hygiene and cleansing and scrubbing information, we need to understand sort of philosophically, what does good mean? So, in order to get that foundation, you need to first have that captured, to my mind at least. And then the other part to that, I mean, and then the sort of the question that you framed, mentioned organically strengthening things. And organically, is a really good way to put it. So even if we have an idea of what good data should look like, it doesn't mean that we're going to be able to produce that straight away. frankly, we can't afford, as in any industry, go through a 4 or 5 year program of data enhancements and data cleansing and analytics to be established. So not only can we consider what good data is, we should also be thinking about what does adequate data look like. What is the minimum amount of data I need to start validating my digital twin or to achieve my goals for reporting? So start first by identifying what is the least I can get away with. Everybody wants perfection, but realistically we can't sort of pontificate in a dark corner somewhere for years to determine that. So establish what does adequate data look like. What data do I absolutely need to maintain? What data is nice to have but not essential? What data can I live with being, a little bit out of date versus information that I need to be near real time and current. So be honest with yourself that you won't achieve all of that for your data foundation to begin with, and then look to strengthen that over time. So once you have that foundation in place, look to increase the amount of data that you bring into your systems, establish other data sources that you may want to link in, and also start to engage the users in that conversation. So one thing we will never do is get every piece of data that a user needs. So how can we start by saying, okay, we think we know what you need, we'll get that laid out to begin with, and then let the users tell us what they're going to need to add to that. What other information would help you do your job? What other information should I add to my digital twin that's going to make your life easier? So again, that organic method of growth, hopefully there's lots of clever people listening in today that can advise, other people on what they want. We can't predict or guess that right away. So we start by establishing a base foundation. What does good information look like? What's the adequate amount of information that I'll need? And then look to grow that over time.
Now, I really appreciate that feedback. And it's so important because we're talking about a relationship between operating companies and their prime contractors and subcontractors. And if you can't have a good conversation about what good data looks like, there's going to be misinterpretations and missed assumptions on both sides of the spectrum. And so really appreciate your letting us know from the view of the EPC what's needed and what's necessary to achieve overall results on a project or operations twin. I want to go ahead and take your keyword of user-centered approach and bring Mario to the table and talk about how do you really adapt for the user? And how do you really account for differing needs of the user in a production environment? And I know you've really come from a production background and kind of learned the data science side of it. If you want to give us a little bit of your story and then jump into how do you support your users?
Yeah, well, yeah. So first the background, right? So I'm a petroleum engineer, right? And I moved around drilling, construction operations. Then I was in production operations. And while I was in production operations, I was a panelist, supervising the production of a gas field. It was such an autonomous field, we had quite a lot of time to begin exploring, other areas. And that's how I got into data science. And one of the challenges that we experienced in Repsol when we began to implement all these new technologies was that we are coming with a completely different mindset, right? So in the industry we are very used to implement projects in a very waterfall shape, right? So we take a year or two planning, right? Then we do our engineering, our procurement, construction, commissioning, and then we close off the project, right? And just that doesn't really work very well for digital projects, right? And why is that? Because when we are going to construct a compression plant, we know how it's going to look at the end, of that project, right? When we are going to drill a well, we know how it should look that well by the end of the project, right? But in digital project, it's completely different, right? And that's where kind of the agile mindset really comes into play, right? It gives us tools to properly manage projects that many times we have no idea how it's going to look at the finish line, especially because each year that finish line keeps moving forward, right? So like we're always trying to catch up with technology, and it's like a continuous process where we need to be implementing, adopting new technologies. And so what's the challenge with this is that when we implement these projects, surely most people that are in the implementation team they have received some training in agility, right? So they understand what's the agile mindset. They are working with Scrum, with Canvas, or whatever, right? So they have the cognitive tools to handle, the uncertainty and the complexity of having, this iterative process where, we develop technology. We're literally developing technology, as we are implementing it, right? But most of our users, hardly have ever heard about Scrum, right, or anything similar. So that's it's very hard to empathize with people, and especially because you're coming in and you're bringing a new technology, you're generating a lot of stress to those people, right? Many times, fear that if they do not adopt the technology properly, they can even lose their job, right? And that can be quite disturbing. So we need to first give them the tools so that they understand that these are iterative processes, right? That the first MVP is not going to look that as nice as many of us would like, right? And but still it's going to be a work in progress. And maybe the probably the second point, and probably the most important point that I would bring to the table, is that regarding that that people have, am I going to lose my job with this new technology, right? Like, is this new technology going to replace me? Like, is the skill set that I have not going to be good enough for this new technology? And what I always argue is that we have such an amazing team in our industry, right? So we have people that are so well trained, so much experience, right? We have people that have 20, 30 years of experience, so they have pretty much my age in oil and gas experience. And there are people where, just by the changes in the sound of a rotating equipment, they know if they need to change the jackets of a piston. And like, what I argue is that a company, an industry that wants to, be really efficient, wants to, secure its place in this times where everything is changing and we need to be, as optimal as possible. We cannot afford to lose those people, right? So like, they are the experts, they know the equipment, they know how the field works. So like, we need to design technology for them, not against them, right? So it's very different to design technology for a digital native, right? Like someone like most of us in this panel, which we have grew with technology, like we've been touching technology, probably since we were 10 years old and or even less, right? So for us, it comes very natural, dealing with technology. But for digital migrants, right? So people that, they have been working in this specific way for decades, right? And now we're trying to come in and change in some way, the way they work. We need to, we need to be very conscious about that, right? Why? Because we are going to end up losing very powerful talent, if not, right? And in my view, yeah, like technology is bringing us a lot of tools, is speeding up a lot of processes, is automating a lot of processes. But we still need, someone is going to go in and do the job eventually, right? Like, we need to go in and operate our wells. We need to go in and launch our pigs. We need to go in. So like, we are not getting rid of people, right? Like that should never be kind of the objective of technology. And I always say that if that's one of the value drivers of technology, that technology is not very well designed, right? Like, technology should be designed to empower people, right? Like, they safer, they they are more efficient, right? Get more insight, can take better decisions, right? So like, we need to focus ourselves, right? So that whatever solution that we're doing, empower people that are on field, on the office, our clients or whatever, right? That's kind of my view on how we need to keep pushing forward this digital revolution.
Mario, so well said. And really, I think a lot of this is about education. It's supporting those that have maybe stress or fear about this transitional time. Whether you want to think the transition is this year, this month, this week, educating those through various processes and training, and really surveying your user base to understand what fears and problems they want to solve before assuming, right? It's just hugely important. Patty, I want to go back to you from a Petronas perspective. Are you looking at any sort of wide-scale education on things like agile fundamentals to help support your users on the front lines, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to the same the answers I was giving earlier in terms of getting the foundations right, and specifically with one of the objectives that we want to become a truly data-driven organization, right? I mean, everybody talks about being data-driven, but then, as I was mentioning, the getting the foundations right is important, and that makes making sure that you have your grassroots level employees being able to interpret data and getting them data literate, right? So we have a wide range of programs that we look at. So while agile is definitely one of those particular, the cultural change that we're really looking at in terms of, okay, how do we act fast, right? And getting that particular habit of experimenting or developing prototyping and all of those particular stuff. At the same time, from a capability building point of view, we have a wide range of programs, right? So I'll name a few. So we have basically, from a data standpoint, we have a citizen analytics program, right? So we have an aim of making sure all 45,000 odd employees that we have within Petronas are data literate. And we're using the citizen analytics program as a core, program for conducting this particular, capability development. And those particular citizen analytics program, again, has different levels. So we have a level 1, 2, and 3. And I'm really proud to say, at least from a level 1 standpoint, right, at least getting that basic foundations right, we managed to cover close to 10,000 employees already, right? And then at a level 2, we talk about a slightly advanced level of training, and this is more in terms of, okay, where people are being trained in terms of, okay, how do they access the kind of data from different sources, be able to go ahead and run it on different analytical tools like Power BI, etc., right? And really use them for generating insights. And then level 3 is probably slightly more in terms of, okay, citizen data scientist kind of a program, right? So that's one. While that takes care of at least getting those particular foundational knowledge right, then we also look at giving trainings and developing the capability on Dharma, for example, right? So we have a particular program called Paddle, or what we refer to as Path to Data Literacy. And this is basically a very foundation level training that we actually look at covering on the Dharma principles, right? So it's a completely e-learning format that we actually go and adopt. We also tie up with a lot of local institutes within Malaysia as well, and that also goes ahead and looks at Petronas contributing towards the national agenda as well, and not just really looking at getting data literacy as part of the organizational culture, but also starting to work very closely with universities and other independent bodies within the country, so that we're able to go ahead and develop those particular content and programs, so that at some point in time also contributing towards the national agenda. These are wide range of programs that we look at, but all with the particular aim of making sure that we have a good amount of data and digital literacy being built for the workers who are going to be instrumental in trying, in terms of driving towards, industrialization or IR 4.0 and stuff like that.
What a special way to think of it, as not only just educating and improving your workforce, but also educating and influencing the communities in which you work when it comes to data uptake, data analytics, data literacy, right? That's a really special, often unconsidered side effect of some of the work that we do. So really appreciate your opinion on that one. I want to take it a little bit further. So once you've considered your user end groups, it really, deployment becomes one of the biggest challenges for any sort of digital process. Thinking about how we deploy, strategies around that, and what sort of chartering needs to take place. Ben, from your perspective, what is the right process, or what is a process that you're used to and you would recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question, Curt. I think, well, maybe by starting by saying where people often fall into, I guess, traditional traps with this. Typically, when we think about digital strategy, digital twin, just any, digital transformation approach, it inevitably starts with people thinking about systems. They look at what's on the market, they look at what technology that they like, they look at, you know, what's cool and new and shiny in the industry, and then they start from there. Okay, that's great, I've picked a tool now, where can I get some data for it? How am I going to train my people? How can I prove, you know, how can I establish a business case now for securing that technology into my business? And frankly, that's a completely back to front approach in my mind. You know, it's the wrong way around. We promote this right to left thinking approach at Wood. So what we should start by saying is what are our value drivers, what are our business objectives? Because that's what's going to start dictating what we need to do next. We can start by saying what's our business value, what do we want to achieve by having this data, by having this digital twin, by having whatever digital technology we're discussing. And then as we go backwards in that right to left approach, okay, what's the data that I would need to realize that? Am I going to get a report from, am I going to get some sort of value, you know, data requirements? What is the data that's going to deliver that value to me? That data then starts to dictate what systems and people and processes we need to deliver the information. So, you know, rather than thinking about what data I get from my tools, what tools should I pick to give me my data? And that is, you know, an essential, but yet sometimes, you know, difficult concept for people to understand, because, you know, we all like gadgets, we all like technology, we all, you know, that's how we shop. You know, we look for things that we like, and then we figure out how to afford to buy them. So that principle is essential, certainly in our experience now, of establishing a solid data foundation, back to the earlier questions. So if we can set out what that data needs to achieve, what the purpose of it is, we can then start to select the technology. And sometimes we need to be realistic about how we select that technology and not align on a single piece of technology either. Again, you know, in Wood, we promote that technology agnostic approach, although we'll have relationships with major software providers, you know, preferred technology. We can't be biased before we start that conversation. We have to look at what is the best fit for the initiative, for the project, for the client to adopt. So, and that may be, again, coming back to those business drivers, what is the value I need to achieve? Is it to reduce my operating cost? Is it to decrease my maintenance burden? Is it to, you know, speed up the time of project delivery? Each one of those factors will dictate, you know, a different preference in technology. And digital twin's a good example of that. We've worked with clients where one digital twin technology, one certain software application was absolutely the best choice for them through design, engineering, and project execution, but it wasn't really fit for purpose through the operating life of the asset. So what we've done with the client is they've switched off that original digital twin tool, replaced it with something that's more operations and maintenance focused, because that's where they're going to get the value from that tool in that lifecycle phase. So again, being flexible with your technology, you know, the charters that you mentioned aren't necessarily to say, you know, you will use tool X for the life cycle. The charter should state you choose the best tool at the right time for the right job. That kind of organizational, you know, impact is crucial. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you choose one technology for your entire organization either. Maybe Project X has a you know, a certain value case that dictates a certain technology compared to Project Y, even though they're part of the same company, part for the same client. So that whole approach around the right to left thinking, you know, we find is essential, because if you get too biased towards certain technology, trying to make things fit your existing processes and procedures is always very difficult. And it's also, you know, trying to make sure that technology fits the needs of the users as well. And I think that sometimes that's overlooked in the goal for getting the coolest, most exciting, most feature-rich tools and you know, massive data sets in our users' hands. We sometimes lose sight of what it is they actually need to do their jobs. Case in point, you know, on one of our recent projects, I talked to a maintenance engineer around, this was part of the use case development phase. So, you know, what do you need to do your job? What would make your job easier? And we started to show this person a 3D model, you know, with lots of maintenance work orders connected to it, something very impressive. And he said, that's great, but it will not help me do my job. I don't know how to use a CAD model. I don't know what I would even do to open that up. It doesn't have enough information. It doesn't show me the things that I need to see. I know where the major pieces of equipment are. What I'm interested in is all the things that sit around it. Is there any obstructions on the floor? Do I need ladder access to it? Is there a scaffolding in the way? He really wanted an as-built laser scan and a PIN ID, because that's what he was familiar with. That's what would help him do his job. So again, that technology has to be driven by the user requirements and the data the same way. And then finally on the processes and procedures. So what we can't do is rest on our laurels once we have technology in place, because that's where most digital twin implementations, in my experience, fail. We think we've done the job once we've put a new piece of technology in place. We high-five each other, we walk away and say our job is done. But realistically, we see that trending over time where the digital twin tools start to decrease in user adoption, start to, the number of logins decrease over time. Is because usually the data itself within the tools becomes less relevant. It gets out of date, doesn't match with what the users know is there on the asset, for example, if it's a brownfield site. So it starts to, they lose faith in that information. And also, the relevance, the functionality may not be what we thought it was, that they actually, what we thought was a fantastic idea, what we thought was going to really help them do something new and unique for the job isn't as successful as we thought. So again, tracking that over time is essential. And then finally, the processes themselves. People will not use tools and technology unless they're forced to in some cases. And that sounds a bit, dictatorial, and maybe it is. But unless we embed the use of that technology into the existing process and procedures that people follow. So to give you an example, if someone needs to go offshore to visit an offshore oil and gas asset, traditionally, they would put a request into their manager and they'd be booked on a flight maybe the next week. Now we say, well, sorry, you have a digital twin in place. You have all the asset information at your fingertips from your desktop. You need to tell me that you've checked that information, that you've used the data available to you before we can sanction you jumping in a helicopter and flying off to that asset. And not only is that saving us money and realizing the value from the digital twin, it's also improving our safety policy, obviously putting less people in harm's way, freeing up the bed space and available persons on board those assets to do more value-adding things that person doesn't necessarily need to be there for. So again, that charter needs to flow through not only the selection and use of technology, but also in ensuring that the processes and procedures that we use every day are updated to reflect the availability of that technology and information, so that the whole organization is almost directed down a certain route. Not just there's not just a drive from the users. It has to come from the whole environment itself, the process and procedures that we have in place to support them.
So many great points that you mentioned, Ben. I wanted to help summarize for the audience a couple of those key ones. The first one is that I believe all of us as digital practitioners are looking for a one-size-fits-all solution. To use a sports term, we're looking for a home run, right? But as Brian from Consberg mentioned in the panel chat, it's, although we may want that from an aspirational standpoint, it's not always what actually happens in practice. And we almost need to accept that we're going to fail fast, and we're going to adapt and be agile, and we're going to change our projects over time. So making sure from the get-go our charters or our roadmaps are set up to allow us the flexibility and the time to do that is really important. The second one is about collecting feedback. I really appreciated your story of speaking with your maintenance engineer, giving you that brutal honesty that this flashy 3D CAD solution is not going to help me do my job better. And if we're able to ask and solicit and actually listen to feedback from our end users like that, we will perhaps produce more impactful pilot trials for software, and we'll have better, more impactful end solutions, keeping those feedback, even though it may seem brutal, keeping that in mind. That's really important. Patty, I wanted to throw it over to you from a not a culture standpoint, but from a design standpoint. Do you see yourselves within Repsol focused more on project twins or operational twins? Just to take a couple minutes to soak on that a little bit.
So you mentioned Repsol. It's actually PETRONAS, but nonetheless, I think it's just a slip of tongue. But yeah, I think from a digital twin standpoint, I think it's more operational twins right now, at least what we're looking at. But again, I'm not really completely involved in terms of the implementation project side of it. I mean, I look at it more from a data strategy and the analytics side of the development as such, the program development.
Sure. Okay, Mario, from Repsol's perspective, do you feel your organizations are focused more on the project or the operational twins at this point in time?
I would say, there is always the kind of the mantra that, everything that we want to implement is, needs to be value driven, right? So whatever digital product, we're bringing to the table, and particularly because of how our strategy works. So we have, our headquarters in Madrid, they identify these technological big bets, which we should be implementing in all the assets all around the world, right? So yeah, it's very value driven. However, it comes in conflict a bit what we were just mentioning, right? So we many times want that home run, so like we developed it once and we implemented it to all of our assets, and we all go happy to our homes, and we just enjoy the benefits. And the truth is that truth is much more complicated than that, right? And a bit what we end up struggling at a product, right? An initiative that is very well designed for an oil asset in North America, where you have 400 wells. Your data literacy, for that field is very low. Like that specific solution is great, right? Because, for example, you might be implementing dashboards, right, which organize all the data that you have, and it gives you a lot of insight on what's going on with your operation. But then you have, assets where, on the other part of the world, where instead of having 400 wells, you only have 6, right? So like that kind of solution, implemented for, assets so different, reality is so different, it's challenging, and like the value that they end up delivering might not be optimal, right? But we do have, like the mechanisms to, re-steer the ship, as we see fit, right? In that sense, I would argue that maybe one of the most complex things are contracts, right? Because being able to put on a contract that I do not want to, like I'm explicitly saying, we are not stipulating, how the end product is going to look. That's very challenging, like, and the people from purchases and contracts, they don't really like that. But it comes a bit with the agile mindset, and we need to find ways to permeate, right, these new ways of working, so that we can ensure that whenever we bring a product or a solution to any given asset, we are doing it in a way that it maximizes the value for that specific asset, right, or the corporation as a whole.
No, I appreciate that, Patty and Mario, from an operator standpoint. Wasim from the chat here talks about the value that we can derive from early adoption of digital twins through engineering, construction, execution. So I'm going to toss it back to Ben from an EPC standpoint. Mario and Patty already talked about the operational benefits and the focus there, and maybe the immediate results you can see from operational twins. But from a construction or project management twin, Ben, there's an immense value. It just might not be as clear or as tangible. Do you want to talk about maybe how many of your clients are working with project or operational or maybe full life cycle? Can you give us some flavor on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and it's become somewhat clear in the past year or two to us, certainly, that it's one and the same thing. So when we talk about digital twin capability, we don't necessarily talk about a digital twin for capital projects or a digital twin for operating assets. We talk about our approach to digital twin for capital projects, our approach to digital twin for operating assets, because what we want to do is end up in the same place. We will still want to end up at a digital twin that services our operating assets, whether we are engaged from pre-feed, feeds, early design, or whether we're joining, a brownfield asset, 30 years into its operation. What we still want to get to is that operations-focused digital twin that has a feature-rich environment that allows, people to recognize the benefits. Because I guess, maybe the point you're fishing at there, Curt, is it's a lot harder to justify or to demonstrate, certainly, the value of a digital twin during projects execution. Sometimes people struggle, and clients certainly struggle to understand, well, why am I paying more? Effectively, if we're looking at digital delivery, digital twin, integrated execution, data focused engineering, there will be some additional investment required in that compared to the old 2D CAD approach of yesteryear. And that's fine, because what we have to do is prove to the client not necessarily that there's going to be a significant return on the project execution, but that they're going to realize those benefits the further on into the life cycle that it goes. So in our mind, we can start to see, let's say, a 10 to 15% benefit in construction time. So if we start a digital twin early and feed and pre-feed, design engineering phases, yes, we will be spending more time specifying data. Yes, we'll be spending more on technology, on systems, and potentially more on that execution. But as soon as we hit that construction phase, that's when we start to leverage that information. There's no handover or there's no downtime while we wait for handover from engineering to construction. The data is being progressively captured. And that comes back to our sort of lifecycle information management approach at Wood is we specify the data that we're going to need through the whole life cycle, and we specify that as early as possible. So we're not waiting to, we're not only specifying information that we need during engineering. The engineering team are given the data requirements that the operations team are going to need. There's effectively empty slots in the database for, let's say, the CMS system to come online, for the advanced work packaging construction management system, whether that's specific to an application that we know we're going to use, or just as the general data properties that are going to be needed. So the projects team are progressively collecting that information through their life cycle, generating the data that's going to help them do their job. And of course, we do see benefits from digital twins in project as we start to track the progress, visualize projects readiness, projects completion. But it's really when we hit that construction and operations readiness phase that we start to see the true benefits. We're tracking construction progress. We're visualizing 4D and 5D, construction activities. We're able to do intelligent completions and commissioning activities. We're able to track our operations readiness and making sure that we have the foundational information for our CMS data builds for our ops systems. So, it seems, reductive to say it's all of those things, but it really is, that the project is there to service the operations. 80% of your overall asset lifecycle total investment cost comes in the operations phase. We only spend 20% during design and engineering. So we should treat, how we think digitally in the same way. It's important to get it done properly during the projects phase, absolutely. But what we really do in that phase is setting you up for success later on in your operations and wanting to get to that end goal and mapping that out as early as possible. Again, as early as possible may mean, it's a 30-year-old brownfield asset and all we can do is gather the data that you have. On a capital project, it's getting in, before a pencil is sharpened to say, right, what is your digital strategy? When are you going to need a digital twin? And the example I gave earlier, acknowledging that sometimes the systems will evolve and change and be swapped out entirely, as we move through those phases. But establishing that clear picture during projects is the absolute first and most essential step in making sure you're going to realize that value from your operational asset, even if that's 4 or 5 years away from today by the time they actually start the asset and start delivering that value.
No, great perspective. It's so easy to say, start with the end in mind, but it's so much more difficult to actually practice, right? Yeah. So I appreciate your feedback on that from a project's perspective. Mario, I want to go back to you about company culture. I can see that you've got an immense amount of passion for digital enablement within company and bringing people along with the ride and not replacing people, but supplementing people, right? How have you been in actually providing user training in an already very busy production-focused environment? You're already trying to deliver results. Everybody's at capacity. We're all very busy and distracted by this challenging world around us. Yeah. How do you then train them for the next digital tools on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a very tough question, right? Because when you're you're on the frontier, right, making sure you're producing that very hard to get hydrocarbon that is fueling human development. It can be kind of hard to get out of that tunnel vision, right? But we need to do our best to provide the environments and the tools so that people can kind of disconnect from time to time, right? And because that's when innovation and very nice ideas begin to pop up from the team that is actually on the field. At least here in in Repsol, what we have are kind of very self-governed, groups where, all kind of young professionals that are very, techy and very nerdy, like we are very honest about that. We are all a bunch of nerds that we love, data science and digital solutions and whatnot, right? So like we get together and like we share all the experience that we are seeing, around the world. So like it's very nice because you get, like an engineer from Bolivia that, has just had this, the solution that they implemented and they're sharing with the rest of the world, right? And like it's very easy to pick it up and to implement it in our own asset, right? We are, we are particularly lucky to have so many talented engineers, that they put it, themselves the effort to learn Python or R or whatever programming language that there is out there. Having said that, one of the things I always kind of push forward, whenever they're bringing, our new solutions is, okay, how am I going to, how is our team going to be able to chip in, on the solutions that need to be iterated over time, right? So, for example, if you're bringing me, a new module for our dashboards, in the digital twin, how are you going to allow my team to develop their own models, right? Like, because no one knows, what are the data-driven models, the analytical models that best describe our asset than, the engineering team that needs to deal with it every single day, right? So, kind of that's a question that, I'm still to find, an implementation contractor that is able to give me, a very nice and robust answer. But I do think that, somewhere in the future, we need to find ways in which, we have people, who are talented and they have know-how and they want to develop, those data-driven models. We need to find a way on how, they can test, deploy, and improve those models over time, right? It's complex because, like that brings us a bit on kind of data interoperability. But, we again, we are lucky enough to be in an industry where we have so many talented engineers, nerdy enough to want to get into data science and data-driven solutions, and like we should do the best use of that, as we possibly can, because like they like it comes with a lot of innovation and it comes with a lot of ideas that, if we're just sitting there and just, waiting for some, contractor out there to productivize it in some way, it's going to cost us a lot more, right? Like from an operator perspective, I'm a big promoter that we need to do as much as possible so that, together with data literacy, we provide the environments and the tools so that, whatever solutions and whatever initiatives the teams are developing, they can showcase it, right? So they can show it to the rest of the company what they're doing, and we can congratulate them and say like, this is amazing, like we love it. So like in that way, kind of what we're promoting is that it's very usual for companies, as ours, that technology deployment has a very, top to bottom deployment, right? A very top to bottom approach where, we have these digital experts where, they have selective specific contractors and technologies that they want to deploy across the whole organization. And that's great because it allows you to leverage on economies of scale, right? It allows you to get access to contractors that you normally, or probably a single business unit would not be able to afford, right? But, we also need to complement that with a bottom to up approach, right? Because the very innovative and very, asset-centric solutions are going to come, from the asset, right? Because they know the asset, they know the complexities, they know their own pain points, right? And they are designing for themselves, right? So we need to find a way, to merge these two approaches, so right, so that like we can leverage both the economies of scale, and the support from corporate, but also providing the people that have the know-how and they have the passion, and they have the drive to keep, developing those solutions that really, they give us, a real competitive advantage, right? Because in the end, if you go out and you look for whatever is on the market, you're acquiring what anybody else can acquire, right? But if you promote in-house development and you promote in-house knowledge and expertise, like it's much more harder for your competitors to acquire that, right? I would argue also that maybe we should review how we approach this secrecy in what we develop. I think that open source culture has proven that we could be moving at speed light if we would kind of open our model silos in some way, and we begin to operate or to help each other between companies and contractors. But I think we're on the right track, right? I think open source culture in general is beginning to permeate, right? And we're beginning to find these spaces where we can share and we can code is ever more available. Knowledge is also more available than ever, right? And we need to leverage on that.
Now, I love the idea of the top down and the bottom up, and without both, you're going to find yourself with again misalignment, misinformation, individuals struggling to adopt technology because perhaps it invokes fear, it invokes stress, or maybe just misunderstanding of why it's actually being proposed. So I think it's really important to have both, and it's really healthy to hear both from Patty's perspective, from Mario, that there are these informal groups and clubs and organizations that are forming to cultivate this even after hours. They may not have the time in their busy day to really carve out time to work innovation, but they've got the passion and drive, and they want to make it happen, and they know it's the right thing, and it's what's going to enhance our future generations. So it's really important to think about that as well. So appreciate both of your perspectives. To help close this out here, Ben, just curious from a client perspective, have you seen your prospective clients coming to the table with more requests for end user training rather than just digital solutions? Because that's really important, that they're providing training and support for end users and not just a flashy product. And I really appreciate your thoughts on that, just to close this out here.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Curt. So I think, and the guys touched on agile execution earlier, and I could show you an example of one of our agile backlogs, and you'd be surprised at how much of that is not related to technology when it comes to implementation for digital twins and data improvements. So, a huge portion of that is around user engagement, user training, and basically just putting the tools into the hands of the users, and as I mentioned earlier, embedding them into the processes. So, we've got to get away from thinking that digital twin implementation is a technology exercise. It's a people exercise. That's exactly what it needs to be, all the way through from design, inception, information requirements, all those examples I gave, through the session today. Because, and just tying it back to that culture question that you mentioned earlier, there's a word that I like to use when it comes to engaging users. I don't want users to be engaged. I want users to be complicit. They need to be involved in the decision that taken to select the technology, to identify the data. They need to be, complicit in that, so that they have some accountability for it. If they feel like they were involved in the decisions, it means they have some ownership of the outcomes. They wanted to succeed. And it comes back to that user training as well. So, and it can't be just a push from the organization, because inevitably, if you push out training, as a client organization, you'll get the eye rolling from your user base. Oh no, here's another thing I need to do. I don't have time in my busy day to do it. And I had a conversation on this with someone yesterday, actually, is how can we create digital twin clickbait, for want of a better phrase. How can we make it attractive to people to want to click on that thing, to want to join the training course, not to have it forced upon them, and I guess strategizing around that. How can we make, create that pull from an organization rather than a push from the top down is essential. It is through relating it to their jobs. It is through to incentivizing them. We even spoke about, gamification for one of our North Sea assets. Can we actually have a prize for the person who finds the most data faults within the digital twin? So areas for improvement, or, logs the most feature requests. These kind of, initiatives are critical to get the training linked to the engagement, linked to then the value. Because ultimately, if we want to be successful and get value from a digital twin, it needs to be used, and the only way it can be used is by users. And having those, that user base as the critical focus for digital twin implementation is the only way that can happen. As I said, it's not a technology exercise. It's around encouraging people to use those tools, but not even just encouraging or telling them. It's making them want to do it. And to my mind, that is the only way that you will achieve true organizational cultural change, is through pull from people rather than a push out to them. So, to my mind, that should be the core focus of everything that we do within digital transformation.
No, appreciate that, Ben. And to summarize, I really appreciate your perspective about it being a people exercise, not a technology exercise. Digital is woven and is strengthening within our everyday life and every single facet of our life, right? From the fridge we use in our home to our vehicles, to our platforms at work, and everything in between, right? So thinking about the human element about this and how we can support our users who are our true stakeholders. Although our executives are the ones approving these digital projects, our true stakeholders are the end users. So I think it's fantastic group of panelists. I've really appreciated having time with each and every one of you, preparing for our conference today and having these conversations. Adam, from a time perspective, are we free to take one from the question from the audience, or are we out on time?
Yes, that's fine. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Attilio, and he asks about the dual challenge of supporting aging oil and gas assets, right? It's fundamentally easier to justify IT solutions for greenfield, for new endeavors, for new investments, but it's more of a challenge for aging assets. And how are we going to support those aging assets equally or as maybe end of life assets when it comes to digital support? And maybe I'll throw it over to Patty just to give your thoughts from an aging asset perspective. How can we best support them?
So I think primarily in terms of, you go ahead and start really looking at, what these particular assets are, and in terms of, is there any particular value, right? As in, it goes back to that particular same question that we've been talking about. The value, the effort, the ROI, or any one of those particular aspects that we want to go ahead and consider before we actually go ahead and take call in terms of, should we just go ahead and retire them, or should we just continue to do it? I think that's the simplest view that I can actually go ahead and share right now.
Got it. And Antilio's actually refined it to say, how do we support new projects that may be around, much longer than their previous projects? If we've got previously projects that maybe lasted 10, 15 years, and now we're looking at projects that may last 50 years. And I think it's an overall challenge from a technology standpoint to support longer and longer and longer life cycles. And I don't think we've got time to dive into the solutions from a hardware or software perspective today, but Antilio, I'll invite you to reach out to our panelists and ask them directly if you're curious on learning more about their opinions in that space. Again, thank you so much to the team, Ben, Mario, and Patty for dialing in today. I think a really, really great conversation. And Adam, I'll toss it back to you to take us to our next session.